Welcome to Matt and the Macabre, a podcast about all things horror. Join us each week as we review another film, video game, story, or novel in the horror genre. Be warned, there will be major spoilers and harsh language. Listener discretion is advised.
What's up, guys? Hello, and welcome back to Matt and the Macabre. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really glad you're here. I'm Matt, your host, and I do just want to take a second to say thank you so much to everybody who's listening. The show's really starting to get some traction, and it's fucking mind-blowing to me. It's awesome. I know there's hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm just a regular dude who likes to talk about horror. And the fact that you guys take time out of your busy day to listen to me do that really means a lot. I don't even really have words for it, but thank you so much. So let's continue and go ahead and jump back into it. Today, we are here to talk about Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning. This one came out March 22nd, 1985, 11 months after Part 4, less than a year again. They put it on the fast track. Budgeted again at $2 million and will go on to gross right under 22. This one was directed by Danny Steinman in his last film. He never made another one. He only made 4 in his career, and the first one was a hardcore porno movie. But he also made Savage Streets, which came out in 1984, and is a genuine cult classic that features Linda Blair of The Exorcist fame, and Linnea Quigley, who horror fans know from Return of the Living Dead, Silent Night, Deadly Night, Night of the Demons, and just a shitload of others. Frank Mancuso Jr., the producer behind the scenes, couldn't stand Steinman. He called him a pervert, said he made a porno flick instead of a slasher movie. And I have to admit that Steinman does talk kind of longingly about the extended love scene, as he called it, that he shot between Eddie and Tina. Like, in a creepy way. It's really weird, but I'm already getting off track. Last time, we talked about how the final chapter was intended to be the final chapter. However, after it made a buttload of money, the decision was immediately made to go ahead and continue, but they did try to take it in another direction. I don't think it's any secret at this point that Jason is not the killer this time around, but it's the EMT Roy who kills for reasons that we will get into. At the end of the final chapter, they definitely set us up for Tommy to snap and take over as the new killer. And I'm not really sure why they didn't go there. I've read that the initial plan was to make Tommy the killer, but not yet. They wanted to do it after this one. Why they decided to forego Tommy in favor of Roy, I have no idea. Steinman said that all he was told with this movie was to turn Tommy into Jason. So they were still definitely heading that direction, but for whatever reason decided to pump the brakes on making Tommy the killer just yet. And as far as continuing after the final chapter, I've mentioned it before that from a business perspective, if you know you can guarantee $20 million on your bottom line by spending $2 million, why wouldn't you? So I can't really blame them too much for that. One interesting tidbit, though, is that when they were casting this movie, it wasn't known that it was Friday the 13th. It was called Repetition. Most of the actors here didn't know it was a Friday the 13th movie until they started filming. The filmmakers have said that basically because Friday the 13th was so popular, this was to keep the actors from asking for a shitload of money. And that may be true. There may be some truth to that, but I also can't help but think there may have been a little embarrassment there too after all the hype they gave for the final chapter to end the series, or at least end Jason, and now they're going to go ahead and continue. But what did they make? This movie is widely considered the worst of the franchise, or at least it's always in the discussion of which one's the worst. At best, it's seen as the black sheep of the series. And a lot of that is the simple fact that Jason isn't the killer. And let's face it, the killer we did get is pretty lame. I'll go ahead and spoil my thoughts on that. But they also definitely tried to take Friday the 13th back to its roots with this one. And even though Jason's not the killer, it did continue the evolution of what we think of when we think of Jason. And that is something I think a lot of people miss. I know I certainly did when I first saw it, and I definitely hated this movie at first. But I have to admit, my opinion on it has softened over the years. But before I get too far ahead of myself, let's go ahead and jump into the movie. It opens up on someone in a yellow rain slicker walking through the woods at night during a storm. The figure walks through the woods for a little bit and then comes to a stop at a lone headstone that's on the outskirts of a graveyard. And we see that this is Tommy, played once again in a cameo by Corey Feldman. They wanted him for the full movie, but he was already doing Goonies. My understanding is this was done on like a Sunday that he had off at his parents' house. But anyway, the grave, of course, that we're looking at belongs to Jason Voorhees with a makeshift wooden headstone. Tommy hears a couple of guys talking and coming through the woods looking for Jason's grave, and he kind of panics and runs off to hide in the brush. The two guys come up to the grave with shovels saying they got to take a look at the main man and start digging up the grave. One thing that I do find funny in this scene is that Jason's only buried like 3 inches deep. These guys uncover the wooden coffin in no time, and we get a wide shot of them scraping all the dirt off the top of it, and the top of the coffin is more or less even with ground level. Tommy keeps watching in horror from the brush as the two guys pry the lid open and kneel down to take a look at Jason's body, still wearing the mask with huge earthworms crawling out of the eye holes. It's actually a pretty neat visual. And suddenly, Jason lifts up a machete and stabs one of the guys in the gut before he stabs the other one in the neck with what looks like a big-ass ice pick. Tommy starts freaking out and tries to hide a little deeper in the brush as Jason gets up out of the grave and pulls his machete from the gut of the first dude before he makes his way real slowly to where Tommy's hiding. When he walks over there, Jason towers over Tommy and slowly raises the machete and then just brings it straight down as Tommy starts to scream. But then we see modern-day Tommy waking up from the nightmare in the middle seat of a van heading down the road. After a minute, he gains his composure, and we see that there is a section of chain-link fencing behind the driver and the passenger, who I never noticed before is sitting there reading a nudie mag to keep them separate from Tommy in the back. Tommy in modern day is now played by John Shepherd, who, among others, was actually severely disappointed to find out he was starring in a Friday the 13th movie. He had actually gone so far as to spend several months volunteering at a state mental hospital to get ready for the role. And while he's not going to win any awards, I actually think he's pretty good here. I do have some complaints about the movie, but Tommy, at least the way that he's played, is not one of them. But this does open up our first continuity problem. Well, it's not so much a problem as it is a question, because we're never told how old Tommy is in this movie, so when is this taking place? Even though it's never stated, most people agree Tommy was 12 in the final chapter, and I go along with that. That's how old Corey Feldman was when the movie was filmed. John Shepherd, though, the actor, was 24 years old when they were filming this. But everything I've seen online seems to say that Tommy is 17 in this movie. There are several websites that have tried to tackle the Friday the 13th chronology, and they all pretty much seem to land on a 5-year gap between the final chapter and part 5, although none of them really have a good reason. The only one that I've seen is that it's mentioned in the original version of the script, Tommy was said to be 17. I've never seen it myself, but I've got nothing else to go on, so I guess I'll take their word for that. In any case, if we follow the movie math, again, we know the original took place in 1979 because of the gravestone in Part 4, and we know that Part 2, 3, and 4 took place 5 years later, so all of those happened in 1984. Add the 5-year gap everybody agrees to, but nobody can really prove, and we've got this one taking place in 1989. Anywho, we see an emblem on the door of the van that says Unger Institute of Mental Health as we fade to black and credits roll with another small explosion at the title card. I really miss the 80s. Just everything exploded. If you weren't there, I can't make you understand it. And with the music here, we're back to that frantic, kind of panicked feel. And if I'm honest, I actually think I prefer this music and the music in Part 4 over the original in Part 2. I damn sure know I prefer it over whatever the hell they were doing in Part 3. But when the credits are done, we fade back into the bright sunny day at Pinehurst Youth Development Center as the van carrying Tommy pulls in. As the van drives through, we get brief flashes of a couple of the other residents. They park, and the passenger, the one who was reading the titty magazine, his name is Billy, by the way, gets out and opens the back door for Tommy and tries to get him to come out. Pam, the assistant director, and technically our final girl for this movie, comes out to introduce herself to Tommy and kind of coax him out of the van. This whole time, Tommy hasn't said a word. In fact, he's not going to say much through the entire movie. He just kind of stands there brooding and pensive, except for the couple of times he's going to snap and beat the hell out of somebody, but we'll get to that when we get there. Tommy follows Pam inside, and she introduces him to Matthew, the director of the halfway house. Tommy doesn't really respond as the two of them are talking, the two of them being Matt and Pam, but they tell him that Pinehurst is basically on an honor system. They're really laid back, there's no guards, they just want to help Tommy get ready to go back into society and start a new life. Pam sends Tommy off to his room to settle in, and she and Matthew discuss Tommy a little bit and look through his case file. One thing they mention that I don't think is driven home enough is that Matthew says Tommy has been given every kind of treatment and therapy they could think of, and that it's a wonder Tommy's brain isn't fried with all the drugs they've given him. I haven't mentioned it yet, but this movie is set up as another whodunit. With the way Tommy ended in the final chapter, if they had coupled that with really driving home this idea that the treatments and the medications may have fucked him up just as bad as what he actually went through, I think they could have really put a point on it and made a lot of us think that it was actually Tommy doing the killing. I feel like this is a missed opportunity. But up in his room, Tommy's looking at a picture of his mother and sister, and I did smile at the fact that Gordon, the dog, is in the background. He pulls a decent-sized pocket knife out of his bag and tucks it real carefully under his mattress, which, of course, is code for, hey guys, this will come up later. He goes to put his clothes up in the closet, and a big-ass rubber spider drops down in front of him. And Tommy jumps back a little bit before a giggling young black kid jumps down with a grin so big you can almost see through his head and starts to tease Tommy about being scared of rubber spiders on strings. And man, he is one scared cat. This is Reggie the Reckless, who I will just go ahead and say might be my favorite character in the movie. He is played by Shavar Ross, who famously played Dudley on the show Different Strokes. But aside from Friday the 13th, I know him best as Weasel, one of Eddie's friends in Family Matters. But Reggie keeps giving Tommy a little bit of shit, saying, where I come from, you learn to be scared of nothing. And suddenly Tommy turns around and growls at him wearing the same alien mask that he was introduced in Part 4. And of course this scares the shit out of Reggie. And when Tommy pulls the mask off, he cracks just the slightest hint of a smile before he starts pulling a few other masks out of his bag and setting them on the bed. Reggie comes to sit with him and tries to pick one up to check it out, but Tommy kind of panics a little and snatches it back real quick. And Reggie finds out that Tommy made them. And here we're told that Reggie is just visiting because his granddaddy works there. But before he can say anything else, we hear sirens outside and Reggie runs out to see what the action is. Turns out the action is the sheriff bringing in two of the kids that live at Pinehurst in the back of his car. This is Eddie and Tina, who apparently are at Pinehurst because they are insatiable nymphomaniacs. The sheriff caught them over at the Hubbard place screwing their heads off. We don't know who the Hubbards are yet, but we're told they're not real happy with what Matt's doing at Pinehurst, and apparently these two wandering off over there has been an issue. The deputy lets the two out of the back of the car giggling like a couple of schoolgirls, and I just have to point out real quick, I always love seeing these character actors in early films. The deputy is played by Richard Lineback, who I know from movies like Speed, Natural Born Killers, Varsity Blues, Ready to Rumble. I don't know why, but I just love seeing these dudes pop up. It always puts a grin on my face. But the sheriff keeps talking to Matt and says they're lucky this time because Ethel didn't see him. And right on cue, we hear a motor and a dirty, dumpy-looking hillbilly on a dirt bike with a leather biker cap comes pulling up with an equally dirty little woman riding on the back and clinging to him. Obviously, this is Ethel and her son, Junior. And I have to admit, right off the top, Unironically, I absolutely love Ethel. I don't really know any of this actress's other work, but Ethel is so ridiculous as a character and so over the top, and this lady leans into it so hard and commits 100%. It's a joy to me every time she's on screen. And she starts going off on the sheriff and cussing him out, calling the kids perverts, and not even Junior's safe from her wrath, because when he pipes up behind her to kind of back her up, she just turns to him and goes, "Would you shut the fuck up?" And Junior just kind of shrugs like, all right, and looks down at the ground. She tells the sheriff the next one she finds on her farm, she's going to blow their fucking brains out. And then, when she goes to leave, tells the sheriff to stay away because she's wearing a bomb and she'll blow us all up, as she gets on the back of Junior's dirt bike and they take off. Throughout this whole sequence as it's happening, we get a couple of insert shots of Tommy watching everything unfold from the bedroom window. When Ethel and Junior are gone, the sheriff mentions Tommy and asks about him and wishes Matt luck with him before he leaves himself. Then we cut to an axe cutting into a big hunk of wood. The axe is being swung by Vic, who just might be the angriest human being I've ever set eyes on, and who's played by Mark Venturini, who was Suicide in Return of the Living Dead. This movie makes some mistakes, and I'm definitely going to call them out. But I don't know if any of those mistakes compare to the one that Matt made by letting this dude have access to a murder weapon, but we'll get there in a second. In the background, we see Violet, the resident punk rocker girl, and Robin, who, as far as I can tell, is just a normal, everyday chick, hanging laundry on a line. A short, pudgy dude with curly hair comes outside, munching on a chocolate bar, and just looking around with a goofy-ass grin on his face. No, it's not Shelley, but this is Joey. First, he goes over to the girls and tries to get them to let him help with the laundry, because he's really good at doing laundry. And even though they tell him no, Violet just tells him to piss off. He grabs a hold of a white sheet to hang up with his chocolate-covered hands, and they both immediately jump all over his shit. So he goes, well, just forget it. I'll just go help somebody else then. And he wanders over to Vic. He's trying to chit-chat with Vic, who clearly wants no part of it. And in this, we find out that Joey is an orphan and actually loves it at the halfway house because it gives him stuff to do and he can help people. Vic, of course, for his part, hates the place. Joey tries to give Vic a chocolate bar, and when Vic yells at him to leave him alone, Joey sets the chocolate bar down on the wood so he can save it for later. And Vic just takes the axe and chops into the chocolate bar. At this, Joey gets kind of pissy and says, well, if that's the way you feel, forget it, Vic. Just forget it. But I think you're really out of line. And he turns his back to walk away. And at this point, Vic snaps and plants the axe in Joey's back and then just starts hacking into him going to town. The girl starts screaming. Matt runs to the window looking out. And I have to say, I'm a little torn on this scene. On the one hand, it's pretty obvious to have this super pissy dude already swinging an axe snap and use it on somebody. But on the other hand, depending on who's watching, it could also be a perversion of expectations. We've seen plenty of characters use axes and chainsaws and whatnot in these movies, going all the way back to Steve in his introduction in the original. Not once did any of them turn it on somebody else. So I'm not dead convinced that everybody would really be expecting Vic to do that. I don't know. Honestly, it's a toss-up for me. This scene is either painfully obvious or borderline brilliant, and I really can't make up my mind which one. But either way, we cut to sirens blaring as the ambulance pulls in, and 2 EMTs get out and head over to the blood-soaked sheet covering Joey's hacked-up body as we see Vic in the back of a police car with a grin on his face. The sheriff is talking to Matt and asks if there's anybody that should be notified, and Matt tells him there's no immediate family. We find out Joey's mom died in childbirth, his dad took off somewhere. Joey was basically shuffled around different homes until he came to Pinehurst. The 2 EMTs, Roy and Duke, get up to the body, and Duke uncovers it to show us Joey just hacked to bits, with his right arm severed and laid across his back, Everybody gasps at the sight, including Roy, who shoots a look back at Matt. And Duke just pops his bubble gum and calls him a bunch of pussies and tells Roy to come and get his hands dirty. The whole time, Roy just has this incredibly pissed off look on his face. And when he leans down in front of Joey, he goes from being pissed to just glancing off in the distance with like a 1,000-yard stare. And the camera hangs on him for like 5 full seconds before the scene fades to black. I'm going to go ahead and say here that they played their hand way too heavily. It's no secret that Roy is the killer, but at this point in the movie, it's supposed to be. This movie, again, is set up as another whodunit, which is what I meant when I said they tried to take it back to its roots. And they are going to try to give us a couple of different suspects as the movie goes on. Our main suspect is supposed to be Tommy, but by making sure we know Roy's name immediately and then lingering on his reaction as long as they do, they give it away too early. Just way too early. In any case, now we're going to jump to what I assume is later that night with a pair of greasers broken down on the side of the road. I don't know why there are greasers hanging out on the cusp of the 90s. Remember, if we follow the movie math, we're in 1989. Maybe they're just big Travolta fans. I don't know. Pete is the guy sitting behind the wheel and bitching at his buddy Vinny to fix the car. But when Vinny reaches under the hood with a couple of tools, there's this huge spark. So he jumps back and starts bitching at Pete to fix it himself because he's the one that's always fucking with it. Pete lays on the horn to scare the shit out of Vinny, and they bitch a little bit back and forth, and Pete gets out and starts to wander off into the woods saying he's got to take a crap, and Vinny better have the car fixed by the time he gets back. Now, I grew up in the South, okay, if you couldn't tell by the way I talk. Hunting and fishing and all that good stuff. I've definitely had to go boo-boo in the woods a time or two. But Pete wanders off with nothing but a flashlight. He's got no toilet paper, no baby wipes, no napkins, no nothing, and all the leaves on the trees are dead, so that's not an option either. I really don't understand why nobody ever wipes their ass in these movies, but it really fucking bothers me. But Pete goes off into the woods, and Vinny keeps fucking around under the hood. We follow Pete around in the woods for a minute where we get a jump scare with a rabbit that really doesn't work that well before we cut back to Vinny and see somebody fire up a road flare. Naturally, he thinks it's Pete fucking around with him and keeps bitching, running his mouth, but whoever it is just steps forward and shoves the road flare into Vinny's mouth. And even though it is pretty obvious that it's a rubber head, it's still pretty effective and it's a really cool visual. Now we cut to Pete walking out of the woods, fastening his belt and zipping up his jeans. So he absolutely just finished taking a shit. He walks up and he gets in the driver's seat of the car and we see that Vinny's body is slumped over the hood. Pete keeps trying to get the car to start, talking shit to Vinny the whole time, and finally the engine sputters to life and someone reaches up from the back seat to grab Pete's forehead and run a machete across his throat, making Pete the third dude in this franchise, but still not the last, and still not even in this movie, to die with a little gravy in his crack. Now we fade in on Tommy laying awake in bed, having a flashback of having to kill Jason. He sits up in bed all sweaty, breathing heavy, just on the verge of a panic, and rushes over and pulls a bunch of pills out of his dresser drawer and takes one trying to calm himself down. And when he looks in the mirror, a blood-soaked Jason holding an axe is standing behind him. But of course, when he turns around, Jason's not really there. And I've never picked up on it before, but now that I'm watching the movie as a reviewer and not just a fan, I realize this is the first case of them trying to tell us that Tommy is the killer. We go straight from 2 murders to Tommy having a flashback and just struggling internally. This is them leading us in the direction that Tommy's the one doing it, which would have worked a lot better if they hadn't lingered on Roy so hard. I really think they shot themselves in the foot with that sequence. Either way, we cut to the kitchen where everybody's setting the table, and Reggie asks his grandpa if he can go see his brother tomorrow because he'll be in town. Everybody sits around the table, and Tina points out that Violet set too many places since Victor and Joey won't be joining them anymore. She apologizes, she goes to pick them up, and for some reason that's when Jake, the resident stutterer, decides to jump all over her ass for setting a place for a dead person. But Matt comes in and calms everybody down before it can get out of hand. Tommy comes in a little late to join everybody, and Matt asks if he would go get Eddie to come down for breakfast. Tommy's a little hesitant, but he agrees, and when he turns around, Eddie shows up in the doorframe wearing one of Tommy's masks and just scares the shit out of him. Everybody gets a good laugh out of it, except for Tommy, and Eddie starts pushing on Tommy, saying, what's the matter? Can't you take a joke? And Tommy is just going to instantly snap and pick Eddie up in a fireman's carry and slam him through a table, then get on top of him and just start beating the hell out of him on the floor until Matt grabs a hold of him and pulls him off. So, with Tommy's vacant stare when Joey was murdered, plus the murders happening and us cutting straight to Tommy, plus him clearly having a violent anger issue, they've now hung neon signs on Tommy being our new killer. I really, really wish they would have taken it that direction. But now we cut to a raw plucked chicken getting its head chopped off by Ethel. She's got some back and forth with Junior about the loonies at the nut house before her chickens outside start going nuts. She grabs a shotgun thinking it's that damn coyote back trying to kill her chickens again, and when she starts to go out the door, there's some dirty-ass, creepy-looking son of a bitch just standing there in her doorway. And Ethel says what I think we're all thinking, "Who the fuck are you and what the fuck do you want?" He tells her he'd like to earn a meal because he hasn't eaten in 2 days, so she tells him to go and clean all the shit out of the chicken coop, and then I'll fill your stomach. As much fun as I have with Ethel, Junior just kind of gets on my nerves. All he does is kind of echo everything that Ethel says, and it's just not as much fun. But anyway, we cut over to the sheriff and a few officers around the scene of Pete and Vinny's deaths, and now if you had any doubt that it was Roy, they're going to put big signs on that, because the sheriff is standing there just mumbling to himself, what the hell is going on here? And in the middle of picking up a body, Roy turns around and goes, "You talking to me, Sheriff?" They go so far, they go way too far to make damn sure that Roy gets our attention whenever he's on screen. And now we get into director Danny Steinman's hardcore porn history, I think, as we cut to a beat-up old muscle car pulling into a little diner, and it is Billy, the institution worker who was reading a titty magazine in the van at the beginning, and he's there to pick up his girlfriend Lana. Lana goes back inside the diner to finish up and freshen up, and I say we're getting into his porn history for one very simple reason. Well, actually two. This is now the second time we've been introduced to two people just to have them immediately die in the same scene, but now that one of them is a woman, of course we get the obligatory titty shot. Meanwhile, Billy's in the car partaking in some booger sugar while he waits on Lana. Back in the diner, meanwhile, she hears some racket somewhere, looks around and doesn't find anything, so she finishes up and starts to head out of the diner when another fucking cat is thrown down in front of her. You know, when they did this in part 2, I gave it to them, but here it just irritates the hell out of me and I really can't understand what the difference is. I can't articulate it. But back outside, Billy's getting impatient and starts yelling for Lana and honking the horn. When he opens the door and hangs his head out to yell at her, he gets an axe planted right on the top of his head. We cut back to Lana picking up the damn cat, who apparently she keeps as a pet in the diner. She gets outside and over to the car, but she doesn't see Billy anywhere. She gets on in, and I guess thinking he went off to have a piss or something, finds the Coke in the floorboard, so naturally she leans down to help herself. As she's bent over into the driver's seat, she spots a pair of boots and a bloody axe right outside the car. She freaks out and scrambles back and gets out of the car and turns around just in time to catch an axe to the gut. And now, for the second time, we get a kill and then immediately fade over to Tommy. They want so bad for us to buy into the fact that Tommy's doing these murders, but they fuck themselves so hard by making such a big deal out of Roy whenever he's on screen. And I maintain Tommy should have been the killer in this movie. And actually, as I'm saying this out loud, I realize that they're hanging these big signs on both of them because it's a whodunit, but I think it bothers me so much because Roy is such a lame killer with such bullshit motivations. But anyway, for now, Tommy's staring out the window, watching some chickens in the yard, and watching Eddie and Tina run off somewhere to bang each other again. And during this, Tommy hallucinates Jason standing out in the yard with an axe, just staring up into the window. And he does the thing again where he closes his eyes for a few seconds, and when he opens them up, Jason's gone. Next, we cut over to the sheriff's office, where the mayor is there chewing the sheriff's ass because they've clearly got a psycho on the loose, and small towns are supposed to be safe. The sheriff's going to say he knows who it is, and that it's Jason Voorhees, which is going to make the mayor absolutely lose his shit, hollering that Jason's dead, he was cremated. But the sheriff actually gets right back in his face and asks him if he was there to see it. But the mayor just tells the sheriff, get him a fucking live suspect, his job's on the line, before he storms out and the sheriff chucks an ashtray against the door. Now we cut over to Tina doing laundry, where Eddie sneaks up behind her before the two of them are going to sneak off into the woods for some more fun in a scene that was cut down to nothing by the MPAA because apparently it was just half a step away from being a full-on porno scene. This is the extended love scene that Steinman talks so lovingly about. And as they're doing what teenagers do in these movies, Raymond, the creepy-looking drifter that's supposed to be cleaning the shit out of Ethel's chicken coop, is watching them from behind some brush. And when he turns around, he gets stabbed in the gut with a pretty hefty tree branch. Suddenly, Eddie and Tina are finished. Again, this scene got cut down to practically nothing, and Eddie is going to run down to the creek to wash up. While he's gone, Tina's going to lay there, just kind of admiring the scenery while I'm pretty sure we're supposed to be doing the same thing. And then suddenly she opens her eyes and just screams. And the camera cuts to a pair of hedge clippers that get plunged down and then squeezed for a second until the handles meet and we hear the snip and the cracking of bone. It's actually pretty sweet. Eddie finishes up at the creek and makes his way back to Tina, who's now turned on her side. When he rolls her over, we see that those hedge clippers got plunged into Tina's eyes and snipped right in the middle of her forehead. Of course, Eddie panics and backs up against a tree, where suddenly a leather strap is thrown around his head and we see behind it a real thick branch is run through the buckles and spun around so that the strap is just tightened and tightened until it crushes Eddie's head and finally snaps. And I feel like it's necessary to point out that we are now 45 minutes into this movie and we've still only seen the hands and the feet of the killer. So they're calling back pretty hard to the original, which was something I never really noticed when I was a kid. I actually think it works. I'm not calling it out as a problem. I'm calling it out because it's something I noticed. But now we're going to cut to Reggie in the truck hollering at Pam saying, let's go. She's fixing to take him to see his brother Demon. While he's doing this, Pam's telling Matt that Tina and Eddie will show up any minute, and they see Tommy just kind of hanging out by a tree. So Matt tells Pam to take Tommy with her. It'll do him good to get out of here for a while. Tommy's hesitant, as usual, but he agrees to go. And watching it this time, I realize there's really no reason for Tommy to go, except that we need him to disappear for a little while for the murders that are coming up. They take off down the road in a blue Ford pickup and eventually pull into a trailer park. Pam tries to get Tommy to walk with them, but he says he'll just wait at the truck. Reggie runs up and starts banging on the door of a red van, and it's opened up by a dude who is a painfully obvious and painfully cheap Michael Jackson knockoff. This is Demon, played by Miguel Nunez Jr., another actor who appeared in Return of the Living Dead, and that I also knew as a kid as DJ in Street Fighter and TJ in Slam Dunk Ernest. My movie taste is all over the place, okay? We listen and we don't judge. This dude is such a fun presence, though, and a great character actor that I don't think gets enough credit. He also showed up in Scooby-Doo as the voodoo guy on the beach that was trying to sacrifice a raw store-bought chicken. This is another guy that just puts a smile on my face every time he shows up. And Demon is arguably one of the most famous characters in the franchise, but for a really shitty reason. See what I did there? Anyway, he and Reggie have a brief little interplay, and suddenly Reggie spots Demon's girlfriend Anita in the back of the van and immediately starts trying to steal her. after, that is, he introduces Pam as his girlfriend. Demon ends up giving Reggie one of his rings because nothing's too good for his little brother. It's a cute little moment. As all this is going on, Tommy walks over to the flickering neon trailer park sign and starts to look like he's going to have another flashback of having to kill Jason as a boy. But we hear an engine come puttering up, and a bright light is shining in Tommy's face to kind of cut that off, and it turns out it's Junior who's here for reasons. Junior gets off his bike, laughing and just super happy with himself that he really scared Tommy, but then he recognizes the Ford pickup and pings Tommy as a crazy from the loony bin. So he starts yelling at Tommy, tells him his mom's going to chop him up into itty-bitty little pieces, my friend. And the whole time he's yelling all this to Tommy, and then grabs a hold of his shirt and swings on him. But Tommy ducks and proceeds to just kick the holy shit out of Junior. But I will give Junior some credit. Every time Tommy drops him, he gets right back up. But then Tommy just beats the hell out of him a little more. And after a minute, Pam spots what's going on and yells for Tommy, which kind of snaps him back to reality. And Tommy lets go of Junior and just runs off in like a panic and a rage. Pam tells Reggie they've got to go. So he says his goodbyes to Demon, and he and Pam pull away in the truck. And now we come to one of the most famous scenes in this franchise, or maybe I should say infamous. As Demon starts taking a toke from Anita, he starts groaning and grunting, and she asks if he's okay, and all he can say is, "It's them damn enchiladas," as he gets up and starts hauling ass over to the outhouse. So we are now, to be clear, on our third shitter scene of this series. And he's actively letting it loose. Thank God we don't actually have to hear it this time, but he's making enough noise just in sheer relief that we get the picture. But pretty soon, the outhouse starts to shake. Demon gets freaked out for a second, but it's only Anita shaking it from the outside, fucking around with him. And they talk a little shit back and forth for a second. And then, in one of the most bizarre scenes in horror movie history, Anita starts, like, cooing at him. Yeah, "Hey, baby, hey, baby." And then Demon responds, you know, "Ooh, baby, ooh, baby, ooh, baby, ooh, baby." And so while Demon is actively shitting, they've got this weird, like, call and response duet going on. And then suddenly, as Demon is singing his part, we hear Anita gasp. Demon calls out for her, but there's no response. And then the outhouse starts to shake again, but it stops when Demon yells. So now he thinks Anita's fucking with him again. But now, again, without even thinking about wiping his ass, after we know he just had massive diarrhea because he said them damn enchiladas. He fastens up his britches and tries to get out of the outhouse, but the door is blocked. He glances down, and we see that it's blocked by Anita's body laying there with her throat slit wide open. Demon panics and backs up into the outhouse, and suddenly a huge metal rod gets shoved into it from outside. And Demon freaks out and tries to get up into a corner to try and hide, but the rod comes through again and stabs him in the leg before it finally comes in one more time from behind him, all the way through his back and out his gut like 2 feet. I've got to say, though, I really love this scene. Yes, it's ridiculous, but I really think it works on all levels. Well, most levels. I can't really justify the singing back and forth while somebody's got enchilada diarrhea pouring out of his ass. But besides that, Demon is a joy to watch on screen. And then his actual death, the idea of being trapped in like a 3x3 box as somebody's stabbing into it from the outside and there's nowhere for you to go, is genuinely terrifying. And this scene transcends the horror genre. Because I've had conversations in the past, just like with people I work with, people who aren't really horror fans, and the conversation will turn to movies, you know, what our favorite movies are, and probably 7 out of 10 times when I've mentioned Friday the 13th, somebody will ask, "Doesn't someone sing on the toilet and die in one of those?" So, as ridiculous as a part of it is, and even with the issues I have with this movie, This is one scene that I will defend with my dying breath. I will happily die on this hill. But getting back on track here, we cut to Pam and Reggie getting back to Pinehurst. Jake, Robin, and Violet all come out to meet Pam and tell her that now Matt and Gramps are both gone and Tina and Eddie still haven't come back. Pam tells everybody to stay put. She's going to go look for everybody, and she leaves Jake in charge and tells Reggie to get in bed before she pulls away. Now we cut to Junior hollering and screaming as he rides his dirt bike around in circles around the house, screaming to Ethel, "They hurt me, Ma," and she needs to chop them up and kill them. And the whole time Ethel's working on a huge pot of stew, still yelling at Junior to shut the fuck up. She's trying to make his dinner, and at one point she even spits in the fucking pot. Again, this chick is just so over the top. I shouldn't love it. I really shouldn't, but I absolutely do. This goes on for about a minute until Junior comes up to a tree and suddenly a cleaver gets whipped out from behind it and takes his head clean off. And we immediately cut to Ethel inside, and even though I love this, we definitely hear his dirt bike crash, but apparently Ethel just hears the engine die down and says, "About time, you fuckwad." She keeps bitching for a few seconds, and then suddenly a hand holding the cleaver just busts through the window and plants it right in her face, and she just collapses face first into her stew pot. Now we cut to Pam driving down the road and looking around for everybody, and pretty soon the truck dies. So she gets out and just starts walking down the road back toward Pinehurst as we hear thunder start to roll in. Now we cut to a scene from the 1951 movie A Place in the Sun, with a man and a woman in a rowboat, and see that Jake and Robin are sitting on the couch together watching. The whole time, Jake keeps staring at Robin real awkwardly. And for reasons that don't really make a whole lot of sense, Jake decides he's going to shoot his shot. But as he's trying to talk to her, Robin keeps shushing him because she's trying to watch the movie. After a few seconds, though, Robin jumps at something on the screen and inches just a little closer to Jake, which gives him a big old smile and I guess the confidence to try again. So he tells her that he likes her a lot, and he says he really wants to be with her and wants to make love to her. To which Robin just starts giggling, like uncontrollably giggling. Of course, Jake is embarrassed and pissed off by this and yells he didn't mean it and just storms off, leaving Robin alone on the couch. And at this point, I have to say, I don't fully understand why everybody is here at this halfway house. We know Matt owns and runs the place. Pam works there and helps run it. We know Gramps works there, and that's why Reggie's visiting. Tommy's there for pretty obvious reasons, and Joey was there because he was an orphan. But then you've got Jake, whose only issue seems to be a really slight stutter. I mean, I'm sure it's a difficult thing to live with and deal with, especially back then, but I've certainly seen a hell of a lot worse, and I don't think that really warrants living in a halfway house. And then you've got Robin and Violet, both of whom, as far as I can tell, are just regular, everyday young women. I don't understand at all what these three are doing at Pinehurst. Which, again, I know is a small complaint, and it's one of those things you either go with or you don't. And I actually do, but I'm calling it out because that's another one of those things that makes you go, that I'm always talking about in this series. Either way, Jake storms off upstairs, fighting back tears, and lightning starts to flash outside. He decides to go and knock on Violet's door to try to talk to her. He knocks a few times and doesn't get an answer, so just goes in, and Violet asks him, can it wait? She's just kind of in her own little world right now, grooving to her music, flipping through a magazine. Jake says no, it can't, but turns around to walk out and shut the door. And when he takes a couple of steps away, he just kind of gasps, and we cut to a cleaver being held up in the air and just coming straight down as we hear the thud of it connecting with flesh. Back downstairs with Robin, the movie ends, so she turns off the TV and tries to get Reggie to go up to bed, but he is passed out on the couch and just not having it. So she just covers him up with a blanket and goes upstairs herself. She slips off her robe and naturally is walking around the room in a pair of panties and nothing else. and pretty quickly climbs into the top bunk of a bunk bed. She snuggles in, tries to get comfortable, but lightning flashes in the window and is too bright. So she rolls over to face away from the window, and when the lightning flashes again, realizes that she is face to face with Jake's dead body, staring at her with a huge gash in his face, and then they again do the stabbing from under the bed bit when a hand reaches up to grab her neck and we see a machete shoved into her from underneath. And I have to say, I really haven't had an issue with the kills up to this point, but this one really bothers me, and it bothers me partly because they're retreading kills that they've already done twice before now, and by now it just feels a little tired. But more than that, the setup for this kill doesn't make any sense at all. They did this way back in the original with Jack and Marcy, when it's revealed that Ned's dead body is in the top bunk above them the whole time they're screwing around. And even then I called out that when you walk up to a bunk bed, you can fully see the top bunk. It's right in front of your face. So not only do they repeat that kill, but they repeat that mistake and actually make it worse, because not only did she not see or feel the adult body in the bed she was climbing into, she also somehow missed the body of another grown-ass man in the bottom bunk when she walked over to it. I really haven't had too many issues with the movie up until now. I've called out the ones that I have, but this one is up there as one of the worst. And I think if they hadn't already done this kind of kill before, it may not call itself out so hard to me, but they have, and they didn't learn anything from it, so it does. This kill, I don't like at all. I don't think it really works, but let's move on. Let's just set it down. We cut back over to Violet doing some kind of like robot / interpretive dance hybrid to a song that I actually really like called His Eyes by Pseudo Echo, which is an Australian new wave band. If you haven't heard it, the song is hard to describe. It's not quite pop, and it's not quite electronica or techno, but it's a weird blend of the two that, at least I think, genuinely has kind of a spooky feel to it. After I first saw this movie as a kid, when I would watch it again, I had to turn the lights on for this scene because I couldn't watch it in the dark. The music would freak me the hell out, way worse than anything that was on screen. Maybe that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but we listen and we don't judge. Anyway, as she's dancing, we see a bloody hand open her door and a pair of boots step in and the door closes behind them. Violet actually hears the door close, but when she spins around, there's nobody there. And that's because the killer has stepped off into a little corner. We see him step out of the corner behind Violet and walk towards her with the machete in his hand. And when Violet turns back around, he grabs her by the throat, pins her against the wall, and lifts her into the air a little bit before he stabs her in the gut with the machete. And I really want to call out here that we're just over an hour into the movie, and we've still only seen flashes of hands and feet where the killer is concerned. So I think they're actually handling it really well. Number one, for a whodunit, but also as a callback to the original, because that's all we got there too, until Mrs. Voorhees was revealed at the end. Again, I really don't have any issues with how the killer is handled here, except for the simple fact of who it turns out to be. But at this point, I would argue they're still pointing big neon signs to Tommy, because we've had two different kills where the kills happen and then the very next thing we see is Tommy. And then Tommy snapped on Eddie, he snapped on Junior, and then disappeared, and all these other murders started up. They're really pointing the finger hard at Tommy right now, and man, it really should have been him. But let me get back on track. We cut to Reggie downstairs on the couch, being woken up by the storm, and wondering what the nuts are up to now because nobody's around. He starts to walk through the house and makes his way upstairs looking for everybody. Eventually, he opens up a bedroom door, which just happens to be the door to Tommy's room, and when lightning flashes again, he sees the dead bodies of Jake, Robin, and Violet all piled up on a bed. And I gotta tell you, at this point, I can remember as a kid thinking that Reggie was dead meat. And I would genuinely be curious to know if audiences at the time thought the same thing. Of course, at the time, I couldn't have really articulated the reasons, but let's look at the progression. In this series, they've already killed a dude in a wheelchair, They've killed a pregnant girl. Jason got his hands on Tommy as a little boy in the final chapter. The only reason Tommy survived was because Trish was there to attack Jason and get him off of him. But now Reggie's just a kid in a house with a killer and dead bodies completely by himself. And let's face it, Reggie being a black kid doesn't exactly help his chances in a horror movie. I really think at the time, you might believe Reggie was going to die, and absolutely could be forgiven for thinking that way. And by association, being convinced at this point that Tommy's the one doing the killing, because on top of their editing tricks, and the fact Tommy disappeared right before this last series of murders happened, now the bodies of the most recent victims are piled up in Tommy's room. Of course it's him. Actually, as I say this out loud, I'm realizing that the bodies being there is actually just an incredible coinkydink, because there's no way in hell that Roy could have known that was Tommy's room. Things that make you go, Wow, shout out to CNC Music Factory. Anyway, Reggie backs away from the room and someone puts a hand on his shoulder, which makes him shriek, but it's just Pam. She keeps asking, what's the matter? And Reggie says it's Tommy's room, so she goes to take a look. We don't follow her inside, but there's a flash of lightning, and then she just screams and backs out of the room before she grabs Reggie and hauls ass downstairs. Reggie trips and falls, and when Pam kneels down to help him up, the front door just explodes inward as our killer steps through. And he definitely looks like Jason. He's bald like Jason, which I'll bring up in a little bit. But the hockey mask is a little different. Where Jason's mask, even in Tommy's hallucinations, which is a nice touch, has the 3 red, triangle accents, I guess you call them. This mask has 2 blue accents on it, which of course was supposed to be a hint to us, the audience, that this isn't actually Jason. But he just kind of stands there for a few seconds staring at him, and Pam gets Reggie to his feet and runs through the house and out the back door into the storm. The two of them just haul ass blindly through the woods for a good minute before they come up to the road where they see there's an ambulance parked. Pam runs up to it screaming, "Help us," and when she opens the driver door, we see Duke, Roy's EMT partner from the beginning, kind of fall halfway out of the car with his throat slit. And when Pam screams, somehow our killer stands up and is on the other side of the ambulance. I don't know if maybe Roy knows this area better than they do, or if he was just booking it through the woods just out of their line of sight, but him showing up at this ambulance the same time they do doesn't really make much sense. Unless, and this just occurred to me, it was actually the work of 2 killers, which would have been a really fun twist, but I don't have a clue how they could have made that work story-wise. Either way, Pam and Reggie take off back into the woods, and Reggie just turns it on and hits ludicrous speed, and just leaves Pam's ass behind, which I've never really noticed before, but it gave me a good chuckle. And we see that Roy is following them, but he's not running. He's just stalking after them. I'll bring that up again in a bit, but for now, keep it in the back of your mind. Pam and Reggie keep running and stumbling through the woods, and now they are thoroughly separated. Neither one of them can see the other one. They're both calling out for each other. At one point, Pam stumbles upon Matt's body, who's stuck to a tree with what looks like a railroad spike through his head that's pinning him in place. Eventually, she gets back to Pinehurst and inside the house, screaming for Reggie, but there's no answer. She starts to walk through the kitchen, and the window to her left just explodes as Gramps is thrown through it, and when his body hits the ground, we see that his eyes have been cut out. And I do have to say at this point, we've seen a few bodies hurled through windows in this series, but I really think in terms of the timing and the effectiveness, this one actually might be the best. Brenda's body getting thrown through the window in the original was pretty good, but that scene in that moment didn't have the same frantic urgency that's going on right now with Pam trying to avoid the killer and find this kid at the same time. I'm really going to tip my hat here and give them a lot of credit. I think this was done really well. Pam goes back into the storm and takes off running, and we see that the killer is still just stalking after her. Again, I really want to drive that home. He is not running. But Pam collapses into the mud and starts scrambling toward the barn as Roy gets closer, holding the machete in his hand. Of course, we're not supposed to know it's Roy at this point. And just as he gets to her and raises the machete, a fucking tractor just blows out the barn door, and we see that Reggie is behind the wheel. Pam rolls out of the way, but Roy just kind of stands there staring, like he's supposed to be blinded by the light, I think, and Reggie rams into him with the tractor, which knocks him back several feet, and he kind of writhes around on the ground for a second before he just goes limp. Reggie shuts the tractor down and hops off, and he and Pam start hugging and walking over to the body, I guess wanting to know who he is. But they get a little too close, and in true horror fashion, our killer sits up and gets a hold of Reggie's leg. Pam steps up and kicks him in the face a couple of times to make him let go, and she and Reggie haul ass into the barn. Roy gets up, holding his stomach, and his outfit's all torn up and smeared with blood as he stalks toward the barn. He walks in and starts looking around, but of course Pam and Reggie have hidden. He hears some noise in a little wooden shed that's tucked off to the side in the barn, and when he walks over and opens the door, Pam busts out of it wielding a chainsaw and just goes after him. Reggie's cheering from a pile of hay bales as she tries to make contact with the chainsaw, but Roy's holding it off with the machete. Eventually, though, she does get past it and cuts into his shoulder with the chainsaw. But just as she approaches him to try and finish the job, the chainsaw dies. She starts trying to start it back up, and Roy regains his feet, so she just, hurls it at him in desperation and takes off running. And at this point, we see Tommy step into the barn from the busted-out front door. He and Roy just stand there staring at each other for a few seconds before Roy starts walking toward him. And Tommy is just frozen in place in fear and awe, convinced he's staring down Jason once again and having flashbacks to that night as a boy. And all he can say, it's actually, I don't know, it's well done, but I can't really articulate what it makes me feel. All he can say is, "Jason, don't," before Roy slashes him across the chest, which kind of snaps Tommy back to reality as he crumbles to the ground. And as Roy stands over him and gets ready for the killing blow, Tommy pulls the pocket knife out and stabs Roy in the leg with it. And this, I actually do have a problem with. Granted, it's not a big one, but as I've said many times already, calling this shit out is what I do here. We saw this knife back at the beginning when Tommy was settling into his room. So they definitely set up Tommy having possession of this pocket knife. However, what we saw was Tommy tuck that pocket knife under his mattress and then never saw it again. So on one hand, we do have screenwriting 101. They showed us something in the beginning to set it up and have it pay off at the end. But maybe they didn't attend all the lectures in that class, because what we set up was Tommy keeps it hidden under his bed, not that he keeps it in his pocket. And yes, again, I understand it's a small thing, and no, it isn't a big jump for me to fill in the gap that somewhere along the line he put it in his pocket. But if you're going to set it up being tucked under the mattress, then when it pays off, it needs to be pulled out from under that mattress. If he's going to pull it out of his pocket, then show him putting it there. It's such a small thing and it's such a simple fix. But let's move on. Tommy struggles to his feet and climbs up into the hayloft where Pam and Reggie are as Roy gets the knife out of his leg and starts to get to his feet with the machete. Roy walks over and slowly makes his way up the ladder to the loft where Tommy is collapsed on the floor, apparently dead as Roy rolls him over with his foot and Pam and Reggie have hidden somewhere again, but not very well because real quick Roy's going to spot Reggie ducked down behind a pile of hay bales. When Roy starts making his way toward Reggie, Pam's going to step up behind him and just slam him in the back with some kind of wooden handle. It looks like maybe an axe handle. And she swings it at him several times, and when he finally knocks it away, she backs up to the edge of the loft and looks down, where we see on the ground there's a tractor harrow, basically a big metal grid covered with huge spikes. Pam shuffles back and forth, trying to find a way to get around, but Roy has her cornered. But when he raises the machete to go for the kill, Reggie actually jumps at him and knocks him over the edge of the loft. And Pam gets up and the two of them hug and slowly make their way over to look down And Roy's going to pop up and grab Reggie's foot again. And now they're in a full-on tug-of-war with Roy holding onto Reggie's foot and Pam trying and starting to fail to keep a hold of Reggie's hand to pull him away. While this is going on, Tommy comes to and sees what's going on. So he grabs the machete and makes his way over to where they're at, raises it up and just chops it right into Roy's hand, just cuts it clean off. And we cut to an outside shot of Roy hanging from the loft, and we see the mask fly off because before Roy falls straight onto the harrow. The three of them look down, and this is where it's finally revealed that our killer was Roy the EMT, dressed up as Jason, complete with a rubber mask under the hockey mask to make him look bald, that for whatever reason is split open to reveal his face. And this is the point I imagine the vast majority of people in the audience threw their hands up in frustration. But I'll get to that. We cut to a lady filing her nails, and it turns out to be a nurse in the hospital who, for some reason, is eyeballing Pam and Reggie with this real pissy look on her face. The sheriff and another deputy come down to talk to Pam, and now we already know the who and are going to find out the why. The sheriff tells Pam that they found Roy's wallet on his body, and that the boy chopped up at the wood pile at the beginning, Joey, was Roy's son. They got all of this from the fact that Roy has a picture of Joey in his wallet that looks like it could have been taken a few days ago. The sheriff says he doesn't know why Roy kept it hidden all these years, that he was a real loner, didn't even really talk to the other paramedics, and he guesses when Roy got called to the scene and found out that it was his own little Joey all hacked to pieces. ... Roy also had newspaper clippings about Jason folded up into his wallet, so the sheriff says that he used the Jason thing to cover it all up. Now we see Pam goes into Tommy's hospital room to check on him, and Tommy just suddenly whips out a machete and stabs her in the gut, just gleefully cackling. But then he wakes up in a panic and it's still storming outside. It's just a dream sequence. And he takes a second to take a few breaths and kind of calm himself down and lays back onto his pillow with his eyes closed. When he opens them, Jason is standing at the foot of his bed just staring at him. But this time, instead of panicking and closing his eyes and looking away, Tommy just kind of steels himself and stares Jason down. And slowly that image of Jason fades away to nothing and disappears. Then Tommy rips out his IV and stumbles out of bed over to a dresser where he opens up a drawer and we see that he's got Roy's hockey mask in it. I would think that would have been taken in as evidence, but whatever. We cut to Pam walking down the hallway again toward Tommy's room, and she pauses outside the door but rushes in when she hears glass break and sees that Tommy's bed is all disheveled and there's a huge hole busted out of the glass in the window. As she just stands there saying, "Oh my God," Tommy, real quiet, closes the door behind her, wearing Roy's mask, and steps up to her, raising a knife as the camera zooms straight into his face and fades to black and credits roll. And there we have Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning. I held off on addressing Roy's motivation because there was like a minute and a half left in the movie at that point, but now it's time to get into it. This is the one place where I really feel like the movie falls apart. I've said it before, and it seems the majority of people agree with me. Roy being the killer in this movie is lame. It sucks. But if you can give me a good reason, a compelling reason for why he would do it, then I can go with it. I've said it before, and I mean it. I can go with some pretty goofy, nonsensical shit if you can just give me some kind of logical flow to cling on to. But here, they just don't pull that off. First of all, Roy is Joey's father, but ran off when he was born, never told anybody about it, never stepped forward to claim him or apparently help him in any way because he was just bounced around from home to home before he ended up at Pinehurst. And yet somehow he has a fresh picture of Joey in his wallet that's definitely been taken within the last year. How the hell did he even get the picture? Matt clearly states after Joey's killed that he has no idea who Joey's dad is, that he was never on the birth certificate, And I refuse to believe for a single second that Matt was helping Roy to keep this secret. That doesn't make any fucking sense, and I really feel like I just put more thought into that than they did. Furthermore, I can accept somebody seeing the dead body of their child in that state where it's literally hacked to pieces, just snapping and going on a killing spree. I can buy that, absolutely. But that's not exactly what Roy did. Roy instead took the time to research and collect these newspaper clippings of Jason, then went so far as to not only buy the jumpsuit and the hockey mask, but also a rubber mask to put over his own head to make him look bald like Jason, so the whole time he's doing the killing, he's actually wearing two masks. If Roy had been captured and actually been taken in front of a judge and jury, he would be charged with first-degree murder. Roy's entire setup here speaks very heavily of forethought and planning. It's absolutely not a crime of passion where he just snapped and wanted to kill everybody. And maybe the biggest sin committed in that setup is the fact that Vic, the one who actually murdered his son, the guy he should want to kill the most, gets away with it. He gets put in the back of a police car and then we never see him again. Vic lives, and that is absolutely inexcusable. Also, the victim pool doesn't really make any sense. Well, to be fair, only a part of it doesn't make sense. Killing everybody at Pinehurst, yeah, I can go with that. But then why the hell is Roy killing a couple of random greasers with car trouble? Why does he go out of his way to follow Pam, Reggie, and Tommy to where they meet Demon, just to then hang around after they leave to take out Demon and Anita? Billy, the hospital worker that brought Tommy to Pinehurst, is a huge left curve. What the hell did Billy have to do with anything? He wasn't even there when Joey was killed. And yet Roy took the time to track him down and follow him to the diner to take out him and his girlfriend. But I guess the guy that actually drove the van that brought Tommy was fine and just allowed to get away. I guess maybe that kill is there to give more weight to us thinking that Tommy is the killer, but I just don't think it holds water. And Junior and Ethel, why kill them? Ethel hated those fuckers and absolutely would have been totally fine waking up one morning and finding out they'd all been slaughtered. She'd have been tickled fucking pink. Honestly, it kills me because there is a really great movie in here somewhere. A little more tweaking, a couple more drafts of the script, and we could have had a really strong and compelling whodunit with a gut-wrenching twist where this little boy is so affected and so fucked up by having to kill this mass murderer to protect himself and his sister, and then the subsequent treatment for that trying to help him, that it warps his mind into becoming that exact same thing. I don't know why they decided to take a whole movie to make the transition to Tommy being the killer, but I absolutely think that was the wrong direction to go. Tommy should have been the killer in this movie, and I would argue that even if they had gone that way, you could still have part 6 with Tommy as the hero and having a redemption arc after he's been put away for a few years and has had treatment that works and is trying to get some closure and somehow make up for what he has done. I really think you could make that work. As it is, though, I mentioned at the beginning that my opinion on this movie has softened over the years, and it really has. When I first saw this movie, and for several years after, I hated it. I thought it was the worst one of the series. But now that I'm older, I realize that that was simply because I was hung up on the fact that the killer was not Jason. But even considering that, I'm going to say something that may or may not be controversial to some people, and I'm going to give this movie a recommend. Yes, for the 4th or 5th time, Roy as the killer is lame. It's stupid. It doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't hold any weight when we find out his motivation why. Say what you will about the original, another movie with some faults and a killer that didn't make sense at the moment she was revealed. But when we find out what Pamela Voorhees' motivations were, I buy it. I'm going to repeat myself. Betsy Palmer absolutely sold me on the reasons for her killing spree. This dude sells me on nothing. I will die on the hill that the killer should have been Tommy in part 5. But, in spite of that, I'm still giving the movie a recommend. I've said before, and I'll say it 1,000 more times, my feelings about a movie largely come down to, did I have a good time? And in spite of its flaws, and there are a few, I've called them out, I actually still have a pretty good time with this one. And furthermore, Jason the icon, the character, owes a bit of a debt to Roy the EMT. This movie still continued the evolution of Jason as an idea, as a characterization. Follow me here, let me try to explain what I mean. To the average person, when you think of Jason, what do you know about him? You know he wears the hockey mask, you know he doesn't run after you, he just walks and stalks you, and you know that he kills you in some crazy ways, like slamming your ass against a tree in a sleeping bag. Obviously, the hockey mask started in part 3, but those other two things, which I would argue are huge pieces of Jason's calling card, two of the major things that make Jason Jason, came from this movie. In parts 2, 3, and 4, we've seen Jason book it to get his hands on a few victims. This is the first time our killer does not run. He just walks. Again, stalking after you, just knowing that he's going to catch up. In the previous movies, with the glaring and hilariously awesome exception of Rick's eye popping out of its socket, the kills have been pretty simple. Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple twists here and there, a couple variations, but they're stabbings and slashings. This movie is where the over-the-top kills started, with the hedge clipper to the eyes and getting snipped together to crack through the skull. And of course, the highlight of what I'm talking about is the road flare in the mouth. This is the stuff that led to the sleeping bag getting whacked against the tree. So with all that considered, I'm going to go out on that limb and say that this movie is better than its reputation. It's better than part 3. Yes, it's got some problems. A couple of them are big problems. But here, I've got a lot of respect for what they tried to do in taking the franchise back to its roots as a whodunit and working toward making Tommy our main villain. I still say that should have happened here. I'll never not say that. But even though I don't like it, I can respect it, which is a hell of a lot more than I can say for part 3. Despite its flaws, I think this one is worthy of your time. It's not the best one, not by a long shot, but I still think it's leagues above what they did in part 3, and if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. But audiences at the time did not agree with me. They didn't respond very well to this one. Although I would argue that, like me, that's because everybody got hung up on the fact that Jason wasn't the killer. But it did still turn a profit for Paramount, so they decided to continue, but kind of right the ship, so to speak, and bring Jason back. So he would return from the dead about a year and a half later in Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, which is where we will pick up next time. And I've got to tell you, I'm so excited for this one. I'm going to go ahead and spoil it. I don't think it's the best one in the series, but it's my favorite one of the series. But it's also the first one that I saw, so I've definitely got some nostalgia for it. I've got some bias towards it. I'm definitely excited to talk about it, and I really hope that you can join me. And until then, you kids keep your noses clean, understand? We ain't going to stand for no weirdness out here.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Mad and the Macabre. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Join us next episode as we take a look at another piece of the wonderful world of horror. Mad and the Macabre is not affiliated with, and this podcast has not been prepared, approved, or licensed by any entity that created the media analyzed herein. Music is a horrid discovery by Ayla Scott, licensed under a Creative Commons license. If you enjoyed the show, support us by leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts, and join us over at patreon.com/madandthemacabre for exclusive content. We'll see you next time.